How baseball shaped America. The true story behind America's pastime. Baseball is often called America's pastime, but it is far more than a game. It is a story shaped by history, conflict, culture, and change. A sport that grew with a nation and helped define it. In this documentary, we trace the real history of baseball in the United States, from its earliest roots to the game we know today. Baseball as an American idea. Baseball is often described as America's pastime, but this phrase does not simply refer to popularity. It suggests something deeper, a long and complex relationship between a nation and a game that grew alongside it. Unlike many modern sports, baseball does not rush the viewer. There is no game clock, no forced ending, no constant urgency. Instead, baseball unfolds at its own pace, built on anticipation, repetition, and memory. This unique rhythm is one reason baseball became so deeply rooted in American culture. It reflects the way Americans once experienced time, shaped by seasons rather than seconds, by patience rather than speed. To understand how baseball came to hold this role, we must look far beyond stadiums and scoreboards. We must return to a time before professional leagues, before written rules, and before the United States itself was fully formed. In the early years of American history, leisure looked very different from today. There were no televisions, no digital entertainment, and no organized professional sports. Free time was limited, especially for working-class communities. But when moments of rest appeared, people sought simple forms of play. Games that required little equipment were ideal. A stick, a ball, and open space were enough. Many of these games had European origins. In England, bat and ball games such as rounders had been played for centuries. These games were informal, flexible, and social. Rules could change from village to village, sometimes even from game to game. As immigrants arrived in North America during the 18th and early 19th centuries, they brought these traditions with them. In port cities like New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, diverse communities blended their customs, languages, and pastimes. Out of this mix, new versions of familiar games began to emerge. America before organized baseball. Early American bat and ball games were rarely standardized. Some versions allowed runners to be put out by throwing the ball directly at them. Others used natural landmarks, trees, fences, stones, as bases. The number of players could change depending on who was available. What mattered was not precision, but participation. These games served an important social function. They brought people together across age, occupation, and background. In rapidly growing cities, they offered moments of connection in environments that were often crowded and demanding. Baseball, in its earliest form, was not yet a sport in the modern sense. It was a shared experience. By the early 1800s, versions of a game increasingly referred to as baseball were being played throughout the northeastern United States. While the rules varied, a recognizable structure was forming: batters, runners, fielders, and designated scoring areas. As urban life expanded, informal clubs began to organize games more regularly. Competition increased. So did the need for consistency. Different clubs wanted to play with each other, but disagreements over rules often caused conflict. Without a shared framework, organized competition was difficult. This challenge mirrored a broader pattern in American society. As the country expanded, standardization became essential in commerce, law, transportation, and communication. Baseball would follow the same path. From chaos to rules, the Knickerbocker era. In 1845, a decisive moment arrived. In New York City, a group of amateur players known as the Knickerbocker Baseball Club formally recorded a set of rules for the game. These rules did not invent baseball, but they refined it. The Knickerbocker rules introduced several key principles. Teams would consist of 9 players. Games would be divided into innings. 3 outs would retire a side. Most importantly, runners could no longer be put out by being hit with the ball. Instead, fielders had to tag runners or force them out at bases. This single change transformed the game. It made baseball safer, more strategic, and more suitable for organized play. The emphasis shifted from physical force to skill and decision-making. The Knickerbocker rules were not immediately adopted everywhere, but they provided something essential, a reference point. Other clubs began to modify their own rules to align more closely with this framework. Over time, similarities increased. Baseball started to look the same from city to city. This process of standardization allowed for regular competition, record-keeping, and shared understanding. It also encouraged spectatorship. People could now watch a game and know what they were seeing. They could follow teams, compare performances, and discuss outcomes. Baseball was becoming more than a pastime. It was becoming a public event. At the same time, baseball reflected broader American values. It balanced individual performance with teamwork. It rewarded patience and discipline. It allowed for failure but demanded resilience. Unlike many sports, baseball offered no guaranteed pace. The game moved only when players acted. This characteristic would later become one of baseball's defining traits, both admired and criticized. But in the mid-19th century, it aligned naturally with how Americans lived and worked. Baseball fits the rhythm of the time. By the late 1840s and early 1850s, baseball clubs were appearing in multiple cities. Matches were reported in newspapers, scores were published, attendance grew. The game was still amateur, but it was no longer casual. Baseball had taken its first steps toward becoming a national institution. Yet its greatest transformation was still ahead, one that would come not through planning or promotion, but through conflict. Civil War and national spread. As baseball continued to grow in the middle of the 19th century, the United States itself was moving toward one of the most defining moments in its history. In 1861, the American Civil War began. The conflict divided the nation politically, geographically, and emotionally. But in the midst of uncertainty and violence, everyday routines still mattered. For soldiers on both sides, long periods of waiting were common. Training camps and encampments were filled with idle hours between marches and battles. During these moments, soldiers turned into familiar forms of recreation. Among them was baseball. Men from different regions brought their local versions of the game with them. Northern soldiers often favored rule sets like those used in New York. Southern soldiers introduced their own variations. When these groups played together, differences had to be resolved. Rules were negotiated. Compromises were made. Without formal intention, baseball began to unify. When the war ended in 1865, millions of soldiers returned home. They carried with them not only memories of conflict, but also shared experiences, including the game of baseball. Communities across the country adopted the sport. Former soldiers taught it to friends, family members, and local clubs. Baseball spread rapidly beyond its original urban centers. For a nation seeking stability after years of division, baseball offered something familiar and unifying. It required cooperation. It followed rules. It created moments of shared focus. Baseball was no longer regional. It was becoming national. Birth of professional baseball. As the game expanded, so did the desire to improve it. Clubs wanted stronger competition. Spectators wanted higher quality play. This demand led to a crucial change. Players began receiving money. In 1869, the Cincinnati Red Stockings openly paid their entire roster, becoming the first fully professional baseball team. They traveled extensively, playing exhibition games across the country. Their success demonstrated that baseball could attract paying audiences on a regular basis. It also proved that skilled players could build careers through the sport. Professional baseball has arrived. The transition from amateur to professional play was not smooth. Early leagues struggled with organization, scheduling, and financial stability. Teams frequently folded. Players moved between clubs without restrictions. Disputes were common. To address these problems, baseball leaders sought structure. In 1876, the National League was founded. It introduced standardized contracts, league schedules, and centralized governance. For the first time, professional baseball operated within a formal system. This structure brought credibility. Fans could follow teams across seasons. Rivalries developed. Attendance increased. Baseball has become a reliable form of public entertainment. Baseball, class, and urban life. Stadiums emerged as important urban spaces. They were often located near factories, railways, and working-class neighborhoods. Tickets were affordable, making games accessible to laborers and their families. Unlike elite sports that required private clubs or expensive equipment, baseball welcomed mass audiences. This accessibility played a crucial role in shaping the sport's identity. Baseball was not just watched by the working class, it represented them. The sport reflected everyday life, effort, repetition, disappointment, and occasional triumph. At the same time, professional baseball faced serious challenges. Gambling became widespread. Some players accepted bribes to influence outcomes. These scandals threatened the sport's reputation. Public trust was at risk. League officials responded by enforcing stricter rules, banning gambling activities, and removing players involved in corruption. These actions signaled an important shift. Baseball began to see itself not just as entertainment, but as a moral institution that required integrity. This emphasis on order and fairness would shape the game's future. By the late 19th century, baseball had established itself as a permanent feature of American urban life. It was played in major cities and small towns alike. Games were reported daily in newspapers. Statistics were recorded and debated. Fans formed strong emotional connections to teams that represented their cities and neighborhoods. Baseball created local identity. The sport's appeal lay in its balance between individual performance and collective effort. A single player could change the outcome of a game, but only within a team structure. This balance mirrored the experience of many Americans living in industrial cities. Individual labor mattered, but success depended on cooperation. Baseball, in this sense, reflected the social order of its time. As cities continued to grow, so did baseball's influence. It provided structure in an era of rapid change. It offered continuity in a world shaped by industrialization and migration. By the end of the 19th century, baseball was more than a game. It was a social institution, and it was ready for its next transformation, one that would redefine how the game was played, watched, and remembered. Deadball era and early stars. As the 20th century began, baseball entered a period defined not by spectacle, but by control. This era would later be known as the deadball era, a time when runs were scarce, home runs were rare, and games were decided by precision rather than power. Baseballs were softer and often used for long stretches of play. Pitchers dominated the game, using movement, placement, and endurance to control outcomes. Offensive strategy focused on bunting, base stealing, and situational hitting. Every run mattered. For spectators, baseball became a game of attention and patience. Small decisions carried great weight. A single mistake could determine the result of an entire afternoon. This style of play rewarded discipline and intelligence. It also shaped the personalities of early baseball stars. Among the most prominent figures of this era was Ty Cobb. Known for his aggressive approach, Cobb represented the intensity of early professional baseball. He played with a level of competitiveness that unsettled opponents and fascinated fans. Cobb's success reflected the values of the time, determination, endurance, and personal will. During these years, baseball's cultural presence has expanded significantly. Newspapers devoted entire sections to the sport. Daily box scores allowed fans to follow teams closely, even from a distance. With the rise of radio broadcasting in the 1920s, baseball reached an even wider audience. Games could now be experienced in real time, far beyond the stadium. Baseball was becoming a shared national experience. Babe Ruth and the power shift. Then, almost suddenly, the nature of the game changed. At the center of this transformation stood one player, Babe Ruth. Originally known as a dominant pitcher, Ruth redefined baseball through power. His home runs were not merely successful plays. They were events. Ruth swung with confidence and intention, aiming not just to reach base, but to send the ball as far as possible. Fans had never seen anything like it. As Ruth's popularity grew, so did expectations. Stadiums filled with spectators eager to witness his next swing. The game shifted. Teams began to value power hitters. Offensive production increased. The dead ball era gave way to a new style of play. This transformation aligned with broader changes in American society. The 1920s were a period of economic growth, urban expansion, and cultural optimism. Mass media emerged as a powerful force. Babe Ruth became one of the first true sports celebrities. His image appeared in newspapers, advertisements, and radio programs. He represented excess, confidence, and possibility. Baseball entered what many consider its golden age. The sport now offered spectacle alongside strategy. It was no longer only about how the game was played, but how it was experienced. Segregation, Negro Leagues, and Jackie Robinson. Yet beneath this growing popularity lay a fundamental contradiction. For all its claims of national unity, baseball remained segregated. Black players were excluded from Major League Baseball, regardless of talent or achievement. This exclusion reflected the broader realities of American society at the time. In response, Black communities created their own professional organizations, the Negro Leagues. These leagues were rich in talent, innovation, and passion. Players developed creative strategies, expressive playing styles, and strong community ties. Despite limited resources and exposure, the level of competition was exceptional. Many Negro League players were among the best athletes of their generation. The separation of baseball along racial lines meant that the sport existed in parallel worlds. Major League Baseball attracted national attention and financial support. The Negro Leagues thrived within Black communities, but remained marginalized by mainstream institutions. This division denied many players the recognition they deserved. It also limited the sport itself. Baseball, in its segregated form, could not fully represent the nation it claimed to reflect. That reality began to change in 1947. In that year, Jackie Robinson joined the Brooklyn Dodgers, becoming the first Black player in the modern era of Major League Baseball. Robinson's arrival was historic, but it was also deeply challenging. He faced hostility from opposing teams, fans, and even some of his own teammates. Threats and insults were constant. Robinson responded with restraint, professionalism, and extraordinary resilience. His performance on the field proved undeniable. Jackie Robinson's success altered the course of baseball. Integration began to spread across teams and leagues. The color barrier that had defined the sport for decades started to break down. Baseball became one of the first major American institutions to integrate. This shift carried significance far beyond the game itself. At a time when segregation remained deeply entrenched in American life, baseball demonstrated that change was possible. The sport once again reflected the nation, not as it wished to be seen, but as it struggled to become. Media, expansion, and global baseball. By the mid-20th century, baseball had undergone multiple transformations. It had evolved from a strategic contest of precision into a spectacle of power. It had expanded its audience through media, and it had begun to confront its own social limitations. These changes prepared baseball for a new era, one defined by expansion, technology, and global influence. After the integration of Major League Baseball, the sport entered a period of rapid expansion and transformation. The United States itself was changing. Population shifted westward, cities grew, new technologies reshaped daily life. Baseball followed these movements. Teams relocated and new franchises were created in cities that had never hosted Major League Baseball before. The sport was no longer confined to the northeastern and midwestern United States. Baseball became truly national in scope. At the same time, media played an increasingly central role in shaping how the game was experienced. Radio had already brought baseball into American homes. Television now added images to the sound. For the first time, fans could watch games live without being present in the stadium. Moments once witnessed only by those in attendance became shared national memories. The World Series evolved into a major television event. Baseball adapted its presentation to this new reality. Night games became more common. Stadium design changed to accommodate broadcast needs. The way baseball was consumed had fundamentally shifted. As media exposure grew, so did the business of baseball. Player salaries increased. Team valuations rose. Ownership became more corporate. Baseball was no longer just a game played for local pride. It was a major entertainment industry. With this transformation came new challenges. Labor disputes between players and owners led to strikes and lockouts. Seasons were interrupted. Public trust was tested. Each conflict forced the sport to redefine its priorities. During the same period, baseball's reach extended beyond the United States. Players from Latin America, particularly the Caribbean, became increasingly influential. Countries such as the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, and Cuba produced generations of elite talent. Later, players from Asia, especially Japan and South Korea, left a significant mark on the sport. Baseball became a global game. Yet, despite its international presence, baseball retained a distinctly American character. Its structure, traditions, and mythology remained closely tied to U.S. culture. Modern baseball and identity. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, baseball faced growing competition. New sports offered faster pacing and constant action. Audiences' attention spans changed. Critics described baseball as slow or outdated. In response, the sport began to evolve once again. Advanced analytics transformed how teams evaluated players and strategies. Data became central to decision-making. Technology influenced everything from training methods to fan engagement. Rule changes were introduced to address pace of play and accessibility. Pitch clocks, expanded replay systems, and adjustments to game flow aimed to balance tradition with modern expectations. These changes sparked debate. Some welcomed innovation. Others feared the loss of baseball's essence. But adaptation had always been part of the sport's history. From informal games to professional leagues, from radio to television, baseball had continually adjusted to survive. Meaning and legacy. At its core, baseball remained unchanged. It was still a game without a clock, a game where every play mattered, a game built on patience and anticipation. For many fans, baseball was not simply entertainment, it was memory. It was learning the game from parents and grandparents. It was summer evenings and familiar voices on the radio. It was statistics remembered, moments replayed, and stories passed down. Baseball's cultural meaning cannot be separated from its imperfections. The sport reflected American society, its divisions, struggles, and progress. At times, baseball resisted change. At others, it helped lead it. This tension is part of its identity. Baseball tells a story not of perfection, but of persistence. Today, baseball exists in a world of constant motion. Players come from every corner of the globe. Games are watched on screens large and small. Fans engage through data, highlights, and live broadcasts. Yet the fundamental experience remains familiar. A pitcher pauses. A batter waits. The crowd holds its breath. Baseball endures because it allows space to think, to remember, to reflect. It does not demand constant attention. It invites it. This is why, even in a rapidly changing world, baseball continues to matter. It is not only a sport, it is a record of time. If you find this journey through the history of baseball meaningful, consider subscribing to the channel. More stories, more context, and more deep dives into American sports history are coming. This story does not end here.